Welcome back to Seriously Funny. I'm your host, Mashnur Kabir, and I have lived a life of rejection. This week, I was going to talk about how to be happy, but I have finals soon, so that's absolutely not going to happen until all of my finals are over and I've gotten over failing them all. So you're going to have to wait a bit for that one. But yeah, here on the YouTube, you got an intro today. I hope you enjoyed that. That took me a few minutes. You saw me make my coffee. It wasn't really iced today. I did put some ice in it, but that was just to make it colder so it didn't burn my face off. Anyways, due to that intro and all of the pieces, I don't have my lo-fi on right now, so let's go do that. Not having the coffee be cold makes it taste like maple syrup coffee. I don't know how I feel about that. Maybe it's just the caramel I use, though. Who knows? But yeah, I haven't, now we can get on to the episode. And actually, I'm just going to cut this all out for the audio listeners, whatever. Anyway, I haven't done this in a while, so I get a semi-chub, but we're going to go back to my roots. And if you've ever read my blog, you know that 90% of my first body paragraphs were definitions. It was a superb time sitting there Googling stuff and making things way more complicated than they have to be. You know what? I'll do that here too. My camera is shaking, so that's not very fun. Hopefully me just moving my hands around don't mess it up. Anyways, so if we go look up a definition of accept on Google, we get one, quote, consent to receive, parentheses, a thing offered, end parentheses, end quote, and two, quote, believe or come to recognize, parentheses, an opinion, explanation, etc., end parentheses, as valid or correct, end quote. The one that probably fits our purposes the best is the second definition for this episode, at least. However, I do want to make some amendments and make it a little bit more specific as a definition. So we'll go from believing or coming to recognize something as a valid or correct to recognizing a thing as true or valid. So really, we'll just take out the believe part out of there because we don't do believing here, all right? We do stone cold hard facts all the time, except for those times when I make stuff up to hit my 20-minute limit. Then it's a little bit more of a stretching. That's a joke, I think. But yeah, recognizing a thing as valid or true, that thing can be a thought or a situation. Whether it's recognized as valid or true depends on the thing. If we're looking at it, say addiction, and accepting addiction, you're recognizing the truth that you're addicted to something when you accept that fact. It's a thing that is true, and you're accepting the truth of it. When you're accepting the validity, although you could consider validity as a synonym of truth, which is completely fine, and I realize that I could have just given the example I gave with the words switched out, and by definition that is a synonym, or as I called it back in the dark ages, by that I mean 8th grade, synonym, cinnamon, and every other misspelling, because I thought the word synonym sounded pleasant. Listen, synonym, cinnamon, it's just so great. It's so easy to mess up. I love it. It makes me feel like less of a failure because the word can be such a failure. It's wonderful. But if we don't consider it a synonym, validity would apply more so to people's comments. For example, you're fat and you won't admit that you're fat. I'm pretty fat. Someone calls you fat, and instead of calling them a jerk, you think, yeah, that's valid. You accept the fact that you're fat. And there's a lot of different ways to accept things as a human. You can accept apologies. You can accept gifts. You can accept things. I guess this is the first definition that Google gave us, consent to receive. You can receive stuff, and accepting those stuff are fine. If you don't accept them, that's also fine. Do what you want there. That's not the type of acceptance this episode is about. We'll talk about that more when I talk about apologies and forgiveness one day. I got to write that one down, which I've already done because this is a script. So Awesome. But the acceptance that I wanted to harp on more for this episode is that other one we laid out, the one about recognizing. That's the big thing about acceptance. It's really just coming to terms and oftentimes validating, because a lot of times we deny things that we know deep down are true. We know we're addicted. We know we're fat, but we don't want to admit it. We don't want to come to terms or validate the thought that we have buried so deep. Although I'll delve into the importance of acceptance in my third point, I'll give a TLDR on this one and say that acceptance is super important, especially in terms of evolving, which brings us to our second point, which is this paradox. Especially when you look into the monk enlightenment stuff, you're fine, the philosophy that I preach on this teach of a podcast, it's the paradox between accepting things and evolving. The paradox is that if you accept something, then why would you change it? Wouldn't it make more sense to change something if you don't accept it? If you're an addict, why would you accept being an addict? Shouldn't you just reject that, grit your teeth, say, I'm not addicted, pull yourself up by your bootstraps, and just stop sniffing cocaine? Well, that would be nice. But if that were the case, we wouldn't have over 80,000 people dead to the opioid epidemic, now would we? The way I'll respond to this paradox is simply by saying it's not a paradox. I know that's kind of hand wavy, but I find it really funny to be hand wavy. Moreover, these two things, although they're attached, they are not attached in a manner that creates an either or dynamic. It's not that you either accept it or don't evolve, or do accept it and do evolve. That's not the case. Quick cut there on the video. The camera was moving so much and it just triggered me. It's still moving here, but I just swapped to the front camera. I don't know how much the quality drops because of that, but hopefully it's fine. Different angle. Sorry if that's a bit jarring, but maybe you should go listen to the audio. Who knows? But anyways, I have no idea where I was. I found it. I think that this paradox, or the idea of this paradox, comes from a misunderstanding of evolution, and that misunderstanding is understandable. Even though I didn't think much about this until I started looking more into the Enlightenment things, and I think I know about the things I think I know about now. I've made a number of episodes talking about how you're great and you're perfect and you're fine just the way you are. People that knew me a while ago, before I learned more about the Enlightenment thing, although it is something that I've been chasing for probably around 4 years now, if not more, I talked a lot about creation and evolution. And I still do believe that to the fullest extent. The purpose of life, the purpose of everything really, is creation and evolution. I talked about this a little in my episode about death and destruction, but evolution, although I talked about it like it's this thing we do with full purpose and full willpower, really the whole pulling yourself up by your bootstraps thing, when you think a little bit more about evolution in the scientific sense, it's not this thing that's done at will, except for squids maybe, but you can go research that in your own time. Uh, Generally, evolution is simply a natural process that happens. It's not something that gets done. It's not something that's sought after. It's just a thing that happens. In the same way that trees grow old and fall, in the same way stars form and explode, the same way that you grow and die, it's not something where you're aiming for it or forcing it. It's just a thing that happens. The other thing is that acceptance is hard to understand as well. I think that when we think of accepting something, we think of acceptance, and we tend to think that acceptance is this super mature thing that's the first step to growth and overcoming, and maybe not. We'll talk about that in a minute, but that's adding to our simple definition of acceptance. This misunderstanding of acceptance puts an expectation on the act of accepting. I will accept and afterward this thing will happen. You may have heard that exception is the thief, or expectation is the thief of joy. Well, expectation is the thief of everything. Expectation will never live up to reality, or I guess the other way around. Reality will never live up to your expectations. If you accept this person's apology, you'll feel good because you're the bigger person, and then nothing changes. If you accept the fact that you're an addict, you won't reach for that syringe anymore, but then you do. If you accept the fact that you're depressed, it will magically disappear, but you wake up the next morning and you still don't want to get out of bed. If you accept the fact that you're going to die one day and nothing matters, you still flinch if someone pretends to punch you. If I accept the fact that I'm not enlightened, I will not become enlightened. We need to be very mindful of how we apply expectations or wishes or things we think will happen to our actions. Acceptance is one of those actions where that people put so much burden onto. It's very powerful, absolutely. However, if we put too much onto it, it could fall apart. It may even fall apart in such a manner that it doesn't achieve what it would have void of any extra expectation. This does, of course, get into the deeper, get into the topic of expectation, which is once again the topic for another episode. I feel like Paimon in Genshin Impact, whenever you try to explore somewhere that isn't unlocked yet, she stops you and says, let's explore what's ahead of us further or whatever, or something, I don't remember the exact thing. I haven't played Genshin in a minute, unfortunately. But every time Paimon says that you want to punch your monitor. And I hope every time I say a topic for another episode, you want to punch whatever's in front of you too. So I hope that's going great. But to further how acceptance plays into evolution, when we accept something, it's a fact that has to be acknowledged. And after we acknowledge that fact, we leave it there. I've talked a lot about how you're wonderful, and although you may not think you're wonderful, you simply have to get to know yourself. Part of getting to know yourself is that acceptance part of the equation. Once you accept these things about yourself, once you see these things in yourself and you understand them, this magical thing will start happening, which takes us to the next topic. Why we accept, what it does, why it's better than rejecting, and how it's not just a monk thing. And the first thing that we don't always just accept, like how Notion's yellow is basically the same color as their orange. I don't accept that. It triggers me, and that makes me triggered. So I'm going to go cancel Notion, or whatever the power-hungry Animal Farm pigs on Twitter do these days. Anyways, other than the Notion color palette, you should accept things. And the reason is this. I've been holding off the entire episode saying this, but we're here now. Big drum roll. Maybe if I'm not lazy, I'll put an actual drum roll into this. Good diagnosis precedes good treatment. It's a very, very popular term in the field of medicine. You need to know the issue, and the better you know an issue, the better you can treat that issue. If we reject the fact an issue exists, it will never get looked at. It won't be acknowledged. It's something that just sits there, left to fester. We need to look at these things, and when we do that, this magical thing will happen. We don't want to accept something about ourselves just to change it. We simply want to accept something about ourselves in order to acknowledge it. And once we acknowledge it, and we continue to observe it, and we learn more about it without our even having to do anything, you'll slowly begin to evolve. Now, me telling you this is a bit dangerous because it might fill you up with expectations and that'll destroy everything, but I believe in you enough not to fall into that trap. The lens glare on my glasses is just wonderful. You can't see my right eye, but whatever. I lost my place. I said something dumb, and I found it. You'll begin to evolve without even trying. Once you notice things about yourself, the complicated part is noticing those things about yourself without judgment or expectation or any of those things, which is really, really hard. But if you can simply be aware of yourself and accept yourself, then you'll begin to evolve. You don't have to do anything. You won't even have to have a direction you want to evolve in. The process will do what it needs to do in order for you to be where you will be. The last thing I want to touch on here is that other than accepting things for or from yourself, there's accepting external things. forgiveness, having an illness, the death of a loved one. All of these things are all also things that can be accepted and really should be. And this isn't always easy, especially with the death of a loved one. You've probably heard about DABDA, the 5 stages of grief: denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. Acceptance is the last part of the process. So it's usually, it is natural in the process. At one point you will come to accept, but if you can speed up that process, it'll save you a lot of hardship. I'll tell you this now, and when the time inevitably comes, you will hopefully be able to remember that. When someone passes, especially someone you love, chances are they loved you too. Remember that love, accept that love, and accept and appreciate what they did. It will only cause you pain and unnecessary suffering to think about what they could. I still need to make an episode on grief, but yeah. If you have an illness, especially a terminal one, it's important to accept that. It sucks, but it's a thing. Being in denial will only make your life harder and will make you feel worse, because in 99.9999% cases of denial, people know they're in denial. Dissociation is a different topic there, but this is something that should be accepted. And then there's apologies. And honestly, it's up to you whether you do or don't forgive someone. I'm not going to make you forgive everyone, but I will recommend that you accept apologies. In the end, according to the research, you'll feel better. Well, that research is a bit more complicated and a bit more nuanced, but that's another day's topic. And there, that great sentence is, once again, my shirt is not aligned at all. But acceptance will help you to move past things. Sure, is it part of being enlightened monks? Absolutely. But acceptance in itself is extremely healthy. It makes it so that you can move forward. When we reject things, when we deny things, those things will oftentimes stay with us. Well, sometimes you can reject things and move on. If that's you, then go for it. That's fine. But things that stick with you, such as being an addict, you can't reject the fact that you're an addict. Well, you can. It just won't really be in your best interests. But when we accept things, we can begin to understand those things with open arms and open minds. If we reject or deny those things, then we won't look into them because we reject them. Acceptance gives us the option to go forward. Good diagnosis precedes good treatment. Acceptance allows you to form a better diagnostic, and for the things that you cannot change, acceptance lets you move forward in the best way rather than trying to fit a round peg into a square hole. If you accept your circumstances, you can create a better path forward. That's all for this week, though. I hope you can accept that this episode is over and you won't have new information from me or new waveforms of my voice, which is also quite a blessing, for one whole week. Truly painful. I don't know how you'll do it. Other than that, music-wise, everything is still dry. I went back and I've been listening to a bunch of Clinton Kane songs. They're fire, but other than that, I don't know of anything out right now. MGK kind of stopped dropping singles, which is a bit sad, but it's like that sometimes. Anime-wise, however, I finished watching How a Realist Hero Rebuilt the Kingdom, and it was great. I think just whatever I said last episode, listen to that stuff. Wonderful. I would recommend it. And I finished this morning, The Detective is Already Dead. And I really like them both, especially The Detective is Already Dead. Both have hints of slice of life and romance. The Detective is Already Dead has action and mystery, and I am a sucker for mystery anime. I loved Lord El Mello's, 2's Case Studies, whatever that was called, and Heaven's Memo Pad. There's some more, I think Hyoka had some mystery in it. I love the mystery thing in anime, and The Detective is Already Dead is absolutely incredible. I might start reading the light novel. I have no idea, but it is so absolutely awesome. Maybe I really hope that there's a season 2. That'll be so good. Yeah. Anyways, action, slice of life, romance, it has everything. Give it a watch. Aside from that, that's all I got, I think, here. I'm at 24 minutes according to the time, but for like 50 of those minutes, I was doing nothing and moving my camera around. So that probably will cut down to 20. I was going to talk about Apple's car or Apple's glasses if I didn't meet the time, but I don't think I'm going to have to do that. Thank you for listening to this episode of Seriously Funny. I will talk at you next week. Peace.